let's turn to China. One of the issues, again, that came up during the principals planning meeting, which was just a few weeks ago, was everything is China all the time, and with an eye particularly toward Taiwan and what might be happening there. So a couple of the people who mentioned that there's a lot of interest in this and they've been involved in conversations on this very issue with their organizations are Jeanette, Manfra, who's Director of Risk and Compliance at Google Cloud. Sherrod DeGrippo is Director of Threat Intelligence Strategy at Microsoft. And this is going to be a fantastic conversation simply because the moderator also, once again, has so much experience in this area. Lieutenant General Michael Groen is now retired. He's the former director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center within the Department of Defense when it was still the JAIC. There's, of course, been differences in how it's organized today, but he gets to bring all of that knowledge as well to bear. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the conversation. If you want to go ahead and turn on your cameras and mics. I thought that we might, Michael, I'll wait for you to pop on just to make sure you're here, kick off by kind of talking about some of the cyber capabilities that are getting more sophisticated. What does this mean when we're sort of looking at that relationship between an adversary with evolving capabilities, and then, of course, geopolitically, what we said off the very top of the conversation today, which was cyber now impacts everything. So with an eye toward Taiwan and the fact that China may very well launch a forced invasion of Taiwan in the coming years, depending on who you talk to. Dmitry Alperovich's book says we're looking at, I think he said we're on the brink of World War III. What does this all mean? So I'm going to turn it over if we have Mike. If not, I'm going to moderate.
I'm here, Suzanne.
You're here. You're
yeah.
onto that. I was going to say, I'm certainly capable of asking great questions, but I'm not as smart as you are. So. No,
well, yeah, that's not true by a long shot. But and I just turned the lights out here too, just to spare you. You don't have to look at me during the conversation. So if the camera does not come up, I think we can just rock and roll here, if that's okay.
Roger that. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks to being here, you guys. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so everybody, hey, thanks very much for participating this afternoon. And we have a great panel with two fantastic panelists here. Jeanette Manfra is the Director of Risk Compliance at Google Cloud. And then Sherrod DeGrippo is from Microsoft as well. And so, like, I couldn't think of two better panelists to kind of talk through this. And Sherrod and Jeanette, hopefully you heard some of the earlier conversations. But we got a couple hours worth of how the U.S. government was thinking about what they were going to do, what U.S. government tools were, do we have the right legislation, et cetera, et cetera. And through the whole thing, I was just thinking, okay, hold on a second here. The primary targets are probably going to be commercial enterprises, especially if something, if they really want to derail, in a Taiwan scenario, if they really want to create friction and slow down our reaction time. It's not going to be just government networks that'll be targeted. It'll be commercial networks like yours. And so could you maybe, Jeanette, maybe just start with you. Could we just talk a little bit about, like, what do you think about yourself as a target? Do you think that in a Taiwan scenario that the Chinese would come after you as as an institution, as a force multiplier for the U.S.? Could you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think we're always a target, and both of our companies, as well as many others, are always a target, and it's something that we have to deal with on a regular basis. I think the sort of the question then is, would that change if the tensions start to escalate even more, if the U.S. government is starting to take sort of more kinetic actions, other sort of activities, so I would sort of preface it is, we're always under attack, just like government systems are, and we're always preparing for that and learning from that and improving. And so then the thought is, what then could potentially change as things escalate? I would, then you start getting into questions about supply chain. And you get sort of beyond the more traditional kind of cybersecurity scenario that we're already dealing with, and looking at how do all tech companies, as well as the government and their use of our software systems, then sort of manage that additional sort of challenge, in particular around supply chain. I would say is probably the largest concern that we would have, well beyond what we're currently dealing with. But I think Sherrod is much more of an expert on the threat side of this than I will, so I will let her add more.
That was great. And Sherrod, if you could, do you think that you are target number one? I mean, like, would we have a distinction between the commercial enterprise and the government enterprise? I don't know that a Chinese threat would recognize that distinction. And so, like, what do you think about your role as target number one?
I think China nation-sponsored threats absolutely understand the differences within their targeting choices. Software supply chain, as Jeanette mentioned, is generally the #1 targeting, but not just from China, from the rest of the threat actor groups that are nation-sponsored as well. We see technology organizations being the #1 target across that spectrum because there is a cascading force multiplier in being able to compromise the software supply chain or technology companies that provide services and products to their ultimate targets, and being inside that gives them sort of gateway pass access to those further targets down the chain. It's almost like a one ring to rule them all situation. That said, Microsoft is going to be a target of nation-sponsored threats, regardless of country, as well as crimeware threats, because we fall in that technology and supply chain categorization, and we will continue to. And I think Jeanette's right as well. Large technology companies have special, in many ways, targeting, which means that we also have some special responsibilities around defense. It means we have special responsibilities around getting our security house in order, making sure that we're paying attention to our own data, to our own infrastructure, but also to the data and infrastructure, of course, that is responsible to our customers.
Yeah, great. And so earlier in the conversation today, there was some conversations about commercial enterprises being penalized by regulators. We're not talking anything over the top here, but sort of getting the pushback from regulators, like, hey, wait a minute, how is it that you got hacked? How is it? And I doubt that's as significant as an issue for large companies, but I just wonder, as the government sort of wakes up to the vulnerabilities presented by their dependencies on your infrastructure and your architectures, like what kind of protection do you need or want or expect from the government? I mean, would you expect that the government would, we had a conversation this morning about, is there a sister person, where's the closest one? How do I get a hold of them? You have all these other subcontractors that have, data components of the enterprise. What kind of attacks might you expect on your infrastructure, and what do you expect the government to do to help you?
I'll start with that a little bit if I could. I think first the general response to regulatory responses and interaction is that feedback is a gift. Microsoft very much sees feedback as a gift. And so the information that we get back from regulatory bodies is very helpful and important to us. Additionally, the deep public sector partnerships, and when I say deep, I mean speed dial, phone call away, constant contact with our public sector partners, has also been a gift. And I think that those relationships are very close, and they are in the spirit of a collective defense mindset, right? So we have to think in this understanding of we are sort of globally protecting the world. And that has responsibilities to our public sector partners who we are in significant amounts of contact with, and that we have created significant apparatus to make sure that we work in concert with the best interests of those public sector partners when it makes sense.
That's great, Sherrod. Thank you.
I'll just add, Sherrod said, I think really well is, that there are, when people use the term private sector, commercial industry, tech, these are sort of very amorphous terms that can mean a lot of different sort of entities. But when it comes down to when you have, in particular, entities like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, others, right, that have a global scale of infrastructure and capabilities, and are in the business of providing services to critical infrastructure, government, you both have a responsibility as a company to ensure, and I love how Sherrod said feedback is a gift. You're always learning. Things happen, you learn, and you absolutely have a responsibility to fix it, and continuing to do that and to have those relationships, and we have to have a high bar for the security, safety, and reliability of our services, likely higher than other and maybe smaller entities. But there's also a huge opportunity there, because of the capabilities that our companies have developed over years, many, many years, and because of what we've learned, and I'll come back to the workforce, because of the amazing, talented workforce that our companies have, it is a real opportunity to make sort of the global scale changes and improve the overall health of our systems with a smaller group of entities that I think is a real opportunity. And working with the government, and I think some folks know I used to work at CISA and at the government, and that was really sort of looking at what are those real sort of opportunities with companies that both have the responsibility but also the wherewithal to really impact at a significant scale. So I think those are sort of two big aspects to think about, just to kind of add to Sherrod's point. And when you say about the government, what I expect from the government, I think the main thing that I would expect would be that when they have information that is relevant for us to take action upon, either as an industry or as individual entities, that would be shared. And I don't want to turn this into an information sharing conversation that has been discussed ad nauseum, but I do still think that it is the government's responsibility that if they have information, that they do have a duty to warn the entities, whether they're a potential victim or they're somewhere in the supply chain that can do something about it to prevent further victimhood. And it's also important on the government side to be thinking, and I know they are, so this isn't intended to be a criticism, just in terms of setting the expectations, as they're thinking about various different, geopolitical plans and how they might be managing different relationships in different regions and different partners. It is important to think about the potential consequences of actions and the vulnerabilities that might introduce on their side as well, and have those conversations. Totally recognize government needs to be able to have their own space, they have their own responsibilities for the defense of our country, that they can't sort of share everything. But it is really important that they understand what those potential consequences are. And again, if they have information, I do believe that they have a duty to warn either potential victims or entities that could do something in the supply chain to prevent those victims.
Yeah, awesome. I'm nodding vigorously, as you can see on the screen. So exactly right. Just a couple of questions here based on what what we heard earlier today. Like things like if this is important, we can imagine it. You both talked very effectively about like kind of how you're preparing for it. Do we have any kind of rehearsal? Like how do we because I'm not sure that every government office knows exactly who they should be calling in commercial industry, to execute the partnership and to actually, okay, turn on the plan, or if we have anything as formal as a plan. How do you think those initial phone calls would go? Like, how do we rehearse this? Is that something that we should be doing, maybe?
I mean, I'll chime in as, just as a risk management professional. Yes, you should always be planning for all of the different scenarios, even if they're not likely. And you should always be training for that, whether that's in physical or cyber or a combination of both. So I absolutely think that that's necessary. I know Google does. I imagine Microsoft and many other companies plan internally for different scenarios, and think about, what if this happens? What would we do? How would we respond? But I do think, to your point, it is important to to do that collectively, to do that as industry, to do that with government, because there is a lot that you learn. We did a lot of exercises that still go on through CISA, through DoD, other parts of the U.S. government, to sort of play some of these things out. I do think when you're talking about China, Taiwan, and escalating tensions there's a lot of different threads that probably need to be exercised some more, and to think about impacts even beyond tech sector. We have not just government that's using our products, we have other sectors that could be impacted, and so I do think that's important. Ages ago, when I was working in public safety communications and talking to firefighters and others, and one of the things that they would always say is you should never be exchanging business cards on the site of an incident. And I think that goes the same here. Is it has to be very clear, who are you calling, both who do we need to be calling, who is the government calling. CIS has done good work in creating JCDC and other functions that could be that capability to make sure that happens. But again, when you're talking about something that could go very much beyond cyber and that would bring in lots of different elements, there's probably more work that could be done to make those connections and to do that exercise and exchanging of business cards.
Awesome. Sherrod, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it, and it is a significant issue, both for Microsoft reaching out to customers to let them know that we have seen activity that may be of concern. And I've heard, unfortunately, from my public sector friends and partners that people don't answer the phone when agencies call, that it just goes to voicemail and they never get calls back. And so there really is kind of a connection issue. I think, obviously Microsoft has many public sector connections that we are able to leverage there. But if you're not Microsoft or you're not Google, how are you doing that? And as you've asked in the question, do you have a plan? Microsoft is constantly doing threat modeling, right? With very sort of basic scenarios all the way to things that are very, very wild. But after something like SolarWinds or Log4j or some of the other events we've been through, I don't think wild is as wild as it used to be. Right. The spectrum of wild has grown exponentially. So doing threat models and thinking ahead of what if this did happen, and pulling in, from the workforce point, pulling in the creative thinkers, I think that's really, really important. I personally went to college for fine arts. I don't have a technology background in my education, but I've been in the space for 20 years. So when people say, start coming up with wild creative ideas, find the wild creative people that can do those threat models, that can walk through planning out what that rehearsal might look like. I think that we've got to do that. And I think that we've got to make the connections perhaps a little more easy to leverage. Even if we have them, sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that reach outs connect the way that they should.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a generating a habit of a relationship, right? So I always call Sherrod, I always call Jeanette, when something happens. I think it's really important that we build those enterprises. Let me ask you this. I mean, well, in the Marine Corps, for example, we would say, a plan not rehearsed is a plan that's not ready, right? So even if you have a great plan and you think you know it on paper, are you really ready? How do you know you're ready, right? That's I think that's a really important aspect of this. Can I ask you something else? So it's similar but related. The conversation this morning was about how much do you feel that you can defend yourself against a state actor, non-state actor, or foreign actor who's disrupting, destroying, creating havoc in your architectures? Is that a conversation you have? Boy, I wish we could strike back at that one. Hacker X, or do you call the CISA or somebody else to say, hey, Cyber Command, can you help us here? Like, how does that conversation go when you are under attack now and you feel that you would like to defend yourself? Do you have a comment on that?
I can speak a little bit to that. So, from the point of view of Microsoft, which we make a significant amount of products that are being targeted. And I think that the general focus is, let's make a better defense. Let's make a more impenetrable, ring around ourselves and our customers that no longer necessitates thinking in that direction. That said, we do work very closely with our public sector partners to give them everything that we have so that they can make choices based on intelligence that we have observed and then make that choice for themselves. I do see an attitude within the groups that I work with at Microsoft of put in as much blocking as we possibly can. And that sort of comes from an attitude of, oh, we're going to get them. We're going to put in so many detections. We're going to have so much threat hunting going on that we effectively prevent the activity from reaching us and our customers to begin with. And I think that for private enterprise, that really is the option that we have at this time. So Jeanette, I'll let you kind of finish from your perspective.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And it does, it goes back to kind of what I was saying earlier is, our companies have a lot of resources that can dedicate it to this. That's not the case everywhere. And so there is a bit of different sort of relationship and assistance that I think the US government would provide to us who may not probably benefit from some of that, but there are many, many companies, and frankly, jointly, to what Sherrod was saying, is if we're always sort of pushing for building more secure, more safe products and infrastructure, it does make it easier for those folks using it. But the software supply chain is very complicated. And so, there's a lot of points at which, an actor can insert itself, even if, we do the best that we can as big companies. But I think to your point is the kind of help that I, as Google, might want from the government would be very different than maybe a small business in sort of just trying to understand. You hear a lot, right? The IT guy is the same guy who's like cutting the lawn. Right. And in that case, I think we also have an obligation to help those to the extent that they use our products, but also even broader, just as thinkers and sort of entities that can drive, whether that's better open source security. There's a lot of things, better threat intelligence that we can publish and share sort of more broadly. When it comes to our expectations for the government to defend us, and you talked about defense, but then also the bit of the strike back. I am sure there are plenty of times when you're like, man, I wish I could get those guys back. But it's fairly clear that is not our responsibility. That is clearly the government's responsibility to take those actions. If you have private sector doing that, I don't even want to imagine the sort of crazy consequences that could happen. And so, well, yes, it might feel satisfying to think that in the moment. It is very clearly the government's responsibility to take action in the context of all of the various things that they have to manage for the security of our country. And when it comes to the defense, though, I think we as tech providers of software have a lot of responsibility. We'll constantly be learning. We'll constantly be a target, so we have lots of opportunities to learn. But I do think the government and us together can really help raise all, sort of, what is that, lift all boats of small, medium-sized companies that don't have those resources and may not be able to navigate the complexities of securing their environment. So we need to make that easier for them.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I know those small companies struggle with that, right? And they don't know where the boundaries are. They don't know what they should even try, or in some cases not even who they should call. Can we switch gears just a little bit here, because one of the threats that we haven't talked about it yet today here on this webinar, but it is the issue of Chinese, especially, acquisition of U.S. intellectual property through academic and commercial relationships. And if you help follow the thread here, if we're good at defending our enterprises, but we at every conference we're rubbing shoulders with foreign actors, many of them Chinese. We in our academic environments, we have students from the People's Republic in the classroom. Like, how do you rate that threat, and how would you think about that, or what kind of measures should we be thinking about to protect ourselves before we're attacked? Jeanette, you want to go first? Yeah.
Sure, I can go first. I think it's there's a couple of different kind of threads there to pull at. One, I would say, when you're talking about academic research that is designed to be free and open so that you can have best minds collaborating, building off of each other, I think you can run the risk of excluding people from those that research and that conversation just based off of a nationality. I think that is not a good path to go down. And it's designed to be open and to create connections with different communities and different perspectives. And so I think when you think about that space, I would not consider that the same as using government resources to conduct industrial espionage. Those are very different things. And when it comes to the latter, for sure, everybody should be concerned about that. Most companies are, and I do think that when it comes to on the industry side, I think many companies can make a couple of mistakes. Some of it is just basic sort of cyber. They thought something was protected. It wasn't as well protected as it should. Oftentimes, organizations make the mistake of thinking that nobody's that interested in their stuff.
Right.
And so they don't sort of put the levels of protections that was core to their business. And so it's, whether you call it, crown jewels or whatever you might, it is really important as an organization, private sector or public sector, to deeply understand that and just assume that somebody else wants it, and potentially somebody's going to spend a lot of resources to get that information. But it is, I do, personally, and in Google, this mindset as well is you have to be able to have collaborative, open research and dialogue and share information. And so how you sort of balance those two as a government, I know is a bit of a challenge in thinking through, how much of that loss of that intellectual property that is a national security risk. I mean, that's been a debate for 20 years, of which people still, I think, don't agree on. So I would just say I think it's important to continue to have open collaboration when it comes to academic research, and when it comes to things that are potentially going to be used for national security purposes or others, and you would maybe not have that be quite as open and collaborative, and then to think differently when you're talking about a government using their vast resources to conduct industrial espionage on behalf of their industry. I think that is a very sort of clear, different, and important dividing line, and the latter is where the U.S. government should spend its time trying to prevent that.
Great, Sherrod. You same perspective?
Well, so academics as a target are something that I find really, really fascinating, because if you think about that, what is the refrain that you hear all the time about academics? They don't make any money. And so the first thing all of you probably thought was, oh, you can compromise them or you could blackmail them. Sure, but there's actually a better use of an academic, and that is they all have other jobs. Almost across the board, every single time. A law professor also practices law privately. A doctor also works at a teaching hospital. A nuclear scientist is doing scientific research for a private company. And once you're able to compromise an academic in their academic environment, which are typically not well secured, say you get their .edu identity, you can generally hop from that edu identity to everything else that they do. And so that's the reason that we've seen academics as a specific type of target, especially from these nation-sponsored groups, where they know, oh, I just need their edu login, and I know I can search through their email and find the login that they use with their work for somebody in the defense industrial base, for example. So I think it's really important to think like an attacker when you think about broad target types, targeted personas, and understand what the attacker really sees the full persona of who that target is. And academics are one of my favorites, actually, because they're very unique.
Yeah, awesome answer. We're because you see it all the time, right? Where the headlines, of course, are, oh my God, we're giving all our secrets away, and these people are just walking in and taking it out from under our noses. So I think it does deserve a more thoughtful approach and perspective. So thank you both for that. Kind of on the same vein, but the general public's reaction to this conversation. When we talk, we collectively, government and industry both, when we collectively talk about the threat, we talk about capabilities, we talk about who's ahead, who's behind, we talk a lot about risks, we talk about risk all morning. I just get the sense that half of America wants to call it a war, and half of America just wants to go back to bed. Like, what your profession, as professionals in this industry, like, where do you think the appropriate dialogue lies, right? And we were just kind of talking about, okay, one of the vectors might be an academic, environment or something like that. But like, how should we be talking about this as a nation, right? Or as an industry? Is this something that we need to scare more people into action, or is this something that bears watching and it's controllable, and we don't need to send a red star cluster, a headline every time a Chinese academic moves in an ecosystem? Where are we on the fear index? Are we way over the top, or are we not taking it as seriously as we should be?
I think that technology and public sector have to be the ones taking it seriously. It's our responsibility as technology providers. It is fully on us. We need to be secure by default, secure by design. We need to solve this. And I think that we have to build trust with those consumers so that they believe in the technology that they use every day, that it's safe for them to use, and they have a good vocabulary of smart things to do, whether those are enterprise, public sector, consumer. We want them to be educated and understand the threat, but also be able to trust their technology partners, trust their technology providers. I'm a big proponent of not doing victim blaming. Someone who is targeted by a state-sponsored actor, do you really think the average consumer off the street even in the enterprise, has what it takes to be able to go head to head with this type of threat actor. No
Sure.
way, no how. And we can't expect that of them. It's on us to fix it.
Yeah, awesome. Jeanette, what do you think?
I cannot improve on that. 100% subscribe. Agree.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Okay, so here's the big question. So our panel, of course, is called China, Taiwan, and so imagine this scenario: we have an aging leader. He's in his 80s. He's got legacy issue he wants to resolve. He's been chasing this kind of his entire career. This leader has been, just looking for success. He's purged much of the leadership who, would constrain his decision space. He's endured hardships over a long career. He wants one more achievement to cap it off. And seeing through that leader's eyes, do you think Xi Jinping would risk a world war? Would Putin back him up? I mean, what do you think about the relationship now of, technology, and you can take it any way you like, either TSMC or sort of disruption in the whole marketplace? How do you think that might play, and how should we be thinking about that now? Is that a fair question?
I can.
Well, it's the question anyway, I guess, but hopefully it's fair.
Yeah, I can. And I'm going to caveat, and I am not a China expert. I've worked a lot with the Chinese government when I was in the U.S. government, and so I can't pretend to be the best person to make that prediction. That being said, no, I don't think he's going to risk World War III. I think China and their leadership are rational actors in their context, and have this very clear sort of goals that they've set out as a leadership group. I think that now that doesn't mean that these escalations won't happen. Nobody sort of sets out to create massive world war. I don't think. Well, maybe a couple in the back in the history, but I think a lot of it is, how do we sort of collectively prevent and provide off-ramps for ensuring that escalating tensions do not sort of become that kind of World War III scenario. And so, my opinion, to the extent that I'm not a deep expert on China and their leadership, is that no, I don't think they want to risk World War III, and they have a deep sense of their own vulnerabilities, just like we do. And I do think that there are a lot of things that we need to be thinking about and are thinking about when it comes to Taiwan, and should U.S. and Western companies and others lose access to the capabilities that we depend upon in there. And from a Google perspective, we spend a lot of time investing in the improved resilience of Taiwan, thinking about diversifying our supply chain, but there are some real challenges in that space. So I think, China-Taiwan conflict is, one thing. World War, I'm not there yet, but yeah, I'll stop there and let.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to put a political question straight on your table there, but Sherrod, what do you think? Let me add a nuance. Like, does the U.S. have the digital resilience to survive and through a major disruption like a Taiwan invasion? If that's part of your planned answer, that's awesome.
So I definitely think about TSMC quite frequently. I would say there aren't a lot of things that keep me up at night, but the consolidation and almost near singular production out of Taiwan of semiconductors is, I think, extremely stressful for me, just in my own materialism life every day, going to get Starbucks and wanting various technology in my home and things like that. So that does concern me. I think that we've got to probably from a perspective of a public-private partnership, figure out how we can de-escalate the risk there to US concerns. The G7 starts tomorrow in Italy. I think that China, while not part of the G7, will weigh heavy on those talks. And I also think that China, when we think about the most developed nation state cyber threat capacities or capabilities, North Korea, Iran, Russia, China. China's the last one left that still has diplomatic relationships that hasn't really been pushed completely to the fringes. And I think that I believe that there is a desire to remain in that good graces in the global community. I think that there hopefully will not be a risk of, global war. That said, I didn't predict the mass scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. I did not predict October 6th and 7th into Israel. So that said, I think Jeanette and I are not necessarily the people who are able to see into the future in that way. I certainly hope not, but I think one of the things that may de-escalate some of that is to move semiconductor manufacturing to Western allies to some degree, in a much greater degree than it is today.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then we're closing in on time here, but I would love to give each of you just a minute or two to summarize kind of like where do you think we are in starting to have the right imagination about the threat, like we actually understand kind of like what vectors the threat pose to us, and how are we handling it appropriately? Are we paying enough attention to our resilience to any kind of attack? Where do you think we have it right? And this is a very kind of soft question, but like, how do you feel about our resilience and preparation in the technology space as a government and as a commercial industry? Jeanette, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, easy question. 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
you could do it.
I think
you're on CNN right now. You got 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do it like a GAO report. Much progress has been made. More work needs to be done. And I think a lot of what we've talked about, right? There is a lot more work that needs to be done on software supply chain. There is, what Sherrod just talked about in thinking about semiconductors. There is a really significant dependence that could be disrupted and have consequences well beyond the tech sector. And so there's a lot of work to be done. I do think part of your question around have we fully imagined all the different vectors, probably, but you always need to be creative in this space. So I would say we should keep. Have we done a good job of being? Oh, and I think my dog is probably talking to me. But a second. Are we aligned between companies and government on what the most likely scenarios, what the most destructive scenarios, and what we're going to do about those collectively? There's probably more work that needs to be done there.
Awesome. Sherrod?
I think that China is voracious. The appetite is unending for data and for access. And I think that it's a consistent, almost, if it were an individual, we would say it was obsessive, a desperate, constant need to have access and data all the time. And they have created an apparatus to facilitate that. For me, I am watching the AI capability for specifically the nation-sponsored actors. We have already seen China leveraging AI technology and LLMs to do things like reconnaissance, to help them with scripting, to support social engineering. A lot of people talk about AI and have a lot of concepts and visions and things like that. But for me, the bottom line of AI is acceleration. it makes everything faster. And so for a threat actor, being able to have the advantage of extreme speed leveraged through AI, that's something for defenders that is going to be very, very difficult to grapple with. This acceleration is going to be beyond, I think, what most people can comprehend, how fast threat actors will be able to move.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you both. It's such a joy to have a conversation with two, true professionals here in this space. It's exciting to know that we've got people like you kind of like watching the front door and the back door here, as the situation evolves. So Jeanette, Sherrod, thank you very much for your participation today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Michael.